Welcome to Super Nutrition Academy's Health Class with your host and registered holistic nutritionist, Yuri Elkane. Tune in each week for up-to-date insights on breaking health news and best practices on how to eat for awesome health. It's time to get smarter, healthier, and regain your sanity in a world of information overload. And don't forget to join Yuri at supernutritionacademy.com so you too can master your nutrition and health.
Welcome to episode 5. Yuri Elkane here. The Super Nutrition Academy health class continues, and today we are going to be talking about food allergies, food intolerances, and food sensitivities. This is a growing topic of interest, and I guarantee this will affect you in some way, shape, or form, like it pretty much does all human beings. I'm going to share some interesting insights, some new news that has come out as of late February with respect to food allergies and its relationship to growth, especially with kids. And we'll be looking at the differences between those three categories of allergies, intolerances, and sensitivities, because there is a huge difference and it's important to understand what they are. So, first of all, let's look at the basics of I'm not going to go into huge amounts of detail about immune response and immunology because it can be very complex and very scientifically taxing on your brain. So I'm not going to put you through that. It's also really helpful if we have diagrams and stuff to look at. Anyways, we have a whole module on immunology within Super Nutrition Academy, but here I want to specifically talk about immune response with respect to allergies and sensitivities, and then we'll talk about intolerances and the difference between those. So here's the thing. When you have, when you're exposed to, for instance, like pollen, okay? So pollen triggers your mast cells, okay? So you have a number of different immune cells in your body, and mast cells are one type of immune cells, and they release something called histamine as just kind of one of their inflammatory properties. Histamine leads us to feeling sniffly, a runny nose, inflamed eyes, stuff like that. So that's a typical response by histamine. And that's usually related to an antibody called IgE. Okay, we have about 5 different antibodies that are probably the most prominent antibodies in the human body. We have IgA, IgG, IgE, Ig, some other ones I can't even remember now. But the main ones that we want to think about, for at least for the topic of this discussion, is IgE and IgG. So when you think about a food allergy, when somebody says, I'm allergic to peanuts, and they go into anaphylactic shock if they're consuming peanuts, that is an IgE food allergy. That's a full-blown food allergy that would come up in a blood test if you went to your doctor, okay? And here's the thing. Doctors only test for IgE. So if you go to an alternative practitioner like a naturopathic doctor, they can test for not only IgE, but also IgG, which are delayed reactions, okay? So think about a food allergy being the immediate reaction, and it's in a lot of cases it can be very severe, and the IgG response is delayed. So that's more of a food sensitivity. And the tricky part is that it's very tough to self-diagnose a food sensitivity unless you're very in tune with your body, how you respond to foods, if you keep a food journal, and so forth. So recently, I've always believed that I've been highly sensitive to a lot of foods, wheat, dairy, you name it. Okay, so a couple months ago, I did an IgG test with a good friend of mine who's a naturopathic doctor in Toronto. And the results came back, and I had absolutely not a single one, okay? Not a single food sensitivity. It was crazy. I think there was actually one thing that popped up, and I can't remember off the top of my head what it was, but it was something really minimal. It wasn't even, I think it was brewer's yeast. I think that's what it was. Something like that, yeah. Anyways. So I was blown away because I was telling my friends, I was like, you know what, when I eat wheat or when I have dairy, I really feel it. I mean, if I've got wine, I'm toast. Like there are things in these foods that are really affecting my mood, affecting my energy levels. They make me want to sleep. They give me a headache. And so I really thought there was some type of food sensitivity because they're obviously not full-blown food allergies. And a lot of the times, these sensitivities would come on within, half an hour, an hour. Sometimes, these food sensitivities can show up the next day or even 2 days later. So it's really tough to understand where, certain foods are impacting you, how they're impacting you, when you ate them, if it's just them or if it's some kind of little ingredient inside of them. Like if you have sushi and you have ginger with the sushi, but if it's like the pink ginger, then you know that ginger has been inundated with MSG and sulfites, because normal ginger is white. Okay, so pink ginger doesn't do that. When I have that pink ginger, occasionally I start getting very, very irritable. I start getting very agitated, and that's because those sulfites and MSG, not the sulfites, MSG and aspartame are added to that, and those two components are excitotoxins, so they directly impact your nervous system. Now, is it to say that I have a food sensitivity to aspartame and MSG? Well, according to my IgG testing, I don't. So there's obviously some other things going on that are not dependent upon the immune response. Okay, so yeah. So hopefully that makes sense. Anyways, let's bring in intolerances for a second. So food allergies are kind of full-blown IgE immediate responses that are commonly seen with like pollen, peanut butter, shellfish, those are the typical ones. Eggs are up there as well. And those are some of the common food allergies that we know about today. And really all you can do is avoid those, right? So, there's really, if you have an allergy to strawberries or an allergy to peanuts, the only thing you can really do is avoid eating them. And that's fine, right? It's not like avoiding peanuts is going to, be detrimental for your health. So food sensitivities are these IgG delayed responses that are a little bit tougher to diagnose. And if you do an IgG food sensitivity test at your naturopathic doctor, you can get the results of that. Basically with those, depends on the severity of the results. So you might be very, very sensitive to something. And what you'll find is that if you avoid that food for a certain amount of time, you allow the immune system to kind of naturally taper away a lot of those antibodies. So this naturopathic doctor was telling me that he was in school, he would eat a liter. Okay, so about a liter, a whole tub of yogurt every single day. And he developed some serious food sensitivities to that. So several years later, his scores were about 50% lower than they were when he initially did the testing. And that's because he removed dairy from his diet. And his body was able to kind of rid itself of those unnecessary antibodies. So if you have a sensitivity to something or even an allergy, you want to remove that food from your diet, at least in the short term, to see how you're improving in terms of health effects, how you feel, and so forth. Okay, so this is a really interesting up and coming area of research that we're seeing a lot more of. And again, look at the gluten-free stuff, right? Like everyone is looking for gluten-free who's health conscious, and there's a good reason for that, because gluten is very, very problematic for human health. So food intolerances, this is something that a lot of people misconstrue. They kind of just they don't understand it properly. An intolerance is simply a digestive issue. So if you're intolerant to milk, you are intolerant to lactose, which is the main sugar in milk. And that's the reason for that is because your body does not produce the enzyme lactase to digest the milk. So you have what's called an intolerance, whereby you get farty, bloaty, whatever other symptoms you want to throw in there. And that is not the same as a food allergy or a food sensitivity, although there can be some overlap. So you can be intolerant to milk. You can also have a food sensitivity to milk or some component of it. It could be the casein, could be the whey. There's a lot of different things that you can have sensitivities to. So if you have a food intolerance, then it's usually a digestive issue, and sometimes a digestive enzyme can be of benefit to helping you with that. So with that said, I want to share with you a recent study that has come out as of the end of February, and this was shared by the American Academy of Allergy, Asthma, and Immunology. So essentially, and this is, sometimes I get really, I just kind of laugh at some of the science that comes out. Okay, so the title of this one is called "Food Allergies Tied to Impaired Growth in Kids," And I'm just going to read the first couple sentences here. So, food allergies appear to affect children's growth, a new study suggests. This could be due to the fact that the treatment for food allergies is strict avoidance of foods that trigger a reaction. The study of 245 children with food allergies found that they were smaller than other children. It also found that children with more than 2 food allergies were smaller than those with 1 or 2 food allergies. The investigators looked at the body mass index, a measurement that, takes the height and weight into account, of food allergic children, and compared it to BMIs of both healthy children and those with 2 other conditions known to affect growth. And essentially what they came up with was that a greater number of food allergies translates into a greater number of dietary restrictions. Okay, so, and then on and on and on. Okay, so that's, it kind of makes sense. Honestly, it's like saying that those who don't drink water are dehydrated. Obviously, do we really need scientific studies to show this? This one is obviously maybe a little bit less evidence, but I think it's an interesting thing to kind of, clue into. So first of all, what are the big food allergies? Well, we talked about eggs, we talked about peanuts, milk is up there, or dairy in general, and shellfish. Those are the big 4. Soy is now becoming an issue, and obviously wheat and some types of meat can be problematic. Now, the reality is that, if you're not consuming copious amounts of milk, if you're not consuming copious amounts of peanuts, you're going to be fine. Milk is really, obviously, if you don't drink a lot of milk, well, perhaps one of the reasons that we see more and more people becoming so tall and big nowadays is because their mothers or the parents have been drinking lots of milk, and then the kids grow up on cow's milk. And the thing is that cow's milk has far more protein than human breast milk. Okay, so the reason that's important for cows is because cows grow to about a ton in a year. Okay, human beings grow to about, let's say, 200 pounds at most in a healthy way over the span of 20 years. So why on earth would we need so much protein? It's a little bit ridiculous. So obviously, if you're a young kid and you're drinking lots of milk and cheese and yogurt like your doctor says, so you get all your calcium, which is a complete fallacy, by the way, then obviously you're going to be consuming a huge amount more protein, and that's probably going to make you a little bit bigger, presumably, right? So if you're not consuming that stuff, well, maybe you're going to be not getting as much protein or calories in general. So does that mean that you're going to become a wimpy adolescent or a wimpy kid as you grow older? Not at all. There's other foods that are much better sources of nutrients than dairy or peanuts or wheat. So it was interesting just to come across a study that showed that, okay, well, obviously if you avoid certain foods, you're going to impair your ability to grow or thrive, depending on your overall diet, right? If you eat a lot of fast food and you're not getting nutrients in, then obviously if you're not getting enough nutrients that you need to grow, and then you take something like milk, then obviously you're going to be compromised. But if you're eating a whole foods diet with lots of natural whole foods, lots of greens, lots of, legumes, healthy fats, you're going to be fine without those specific allergenic foods. And again, if we look at peanuts, right? Who is going to miss out on life because they can't eat peanuts anymore? Not many people. So what's interesting is that historically the recommendation for parents has been to avoid early introduction of a lot of these allergenic foods, right? So don't introduce peanuts into your kids' diets until they're, let's say, 2 years old. And that was the traditional thinking up until about 5 years ago, when things dramatically changed, where a lot of the research was now showing that the earlier introduction of these so-called problematic foods was actually better, because the human body was able to adapt to it, and the early exposure was beneficial for their immune system. So nowadays, basically the synopsis of this research, of this whole topic area of introduction of foods for preventing allergies, is that the earlier you can introduce foods, the better. However, I need to kind of put an asterisk here. That does not mean you stop breastfeeding. Okay, so if you're a mother and you're breastfeeding, which I highly recommend you do, because it's the most natural way and the most beneficial way for your baby in terms of getting everything it needs. Breastfeeding for a minimum of 1 year is really the best course of action. After about 6 months is when you can start introducing some solid foods. At this point, you can start introducing some of those foods as a way to test and kind of introduce some solids into your baby's diet. Again, obviously you want to check with your doctor. This is not medical advice. I'm just sharing some of the research that has come out in the last couple of years. So, so that's the first thing is kind of this early introduction of foods in conjunction with breastfeeding up to about a year, really, really important. The other thing is that obviously if you're not a kid anymore, if you're 40 years old and you're kind of past that stage, well, what do you do? I mean, if you have an allergenic terrain like I do, so as I mentioned before, I developed an autoimmune condition when I was 17 because I grew up on foods that were very, very problematic for me. Wheat, dairy, processed foods, very inflammatory in the body, and created a lot of havoc for my immune system. So my immune system went haywire and started to attack itself. That's essentially what happened. So if you have an allergenic terrain where you've got asthma, eczema, these common conditions, part of the problem might be that you've grown up in too clean of an environment. And what we're seeing now is something really fascinating that's directly influencing the medical establishments, hopefully a little bit more than it has, and looking at the best practices with respect to cleanliness. Because here's the thing, there's a lot of studies now that are showing that if you grow up on a farm, you're going to have a much stronger immune system and less likelihood of developing eczema and asthma, two kind of atopic allergenic diseases or conditions, than if you grew up in a city. If you grow up in a city, the tendency is that you're growing up in very clean environments where there's very few microbes. You're not directly in contact with the soil where you would naturally come into contact with bacteria and different, germs, which are important to populate your gut flora. Okay, so there's some really interesting, this very, very fascinating, but if you think about it, it kind of makes sense. And this is known as the hygiene hypothesis, where we live in an overly clean environment. Our hospitals, you've got like these Purell antimicrobial washes every 5 feet. It's ridiculous. I mean, sure, washing your hands is important, but the overuse of antimicrobial stuff and antibacterial stuff is creating more of a problem because, again, as I've mentioned, those bacteria become resistant to all the stuff that we're doing. So the whole idea is that, again, if you're 40 years old, maybe you're a little bit past this, but if you've got kids, you want to expose them to dirt, expose them to animals. There's more studies that have shown, I'm going to just pull up a recent, not a recent, but a very compelling bit of research that was done in the Journal of the American Medical Association. So obviously it's the JAMA journal, a big one. It's a very, very, very prominent journal. Essentially what they showed is that growing up with 2 dogs is highly protective against all allergies. And thankfully, we've got 2 little dogs in our house. I didn't even know that, 5 years ago when we got the dogs. So why does that happen? First of all, if you're not exposed to the soil, then most likely your dogs are. So they go out there and they do their poop and their pee and they lick that stuff up and they roll around in the dirt and they come back inside. And some people freak out and say, okay, it's so dirty, or these germs all over the place. Well, that's a good thing, right? You want your dog to lick your kid. Like, I'm not, maybe not all the time, but essentially your kids and you are going to grow up and live with an animal that is bringing in natural microbes into your environment, and that's going to help populate your gut flora in a good way. Okay? The gut flora is the bacteria in your colon. That's very, very important because it's about 80% of your immune system is developed and kind of resonates in and around your gut. Okay? This is known as the gut-associated lymphoid tissue, or GALT. Really, really powerful. Also, there's really some interesting stuff. A lot of this research about farm versus city comes out of Europe, because that's where you tend to have a lot of these smaller towns which are kind of farm based, and that's where they've tended to do a lot of the research. And they've it was interesting. There's just kind of showing pictures of Bavaria, so southern Germany, and how families grew up. Or still grow up actually in kind of the rural setting where they have the kitchen is adjacent to the barn. So you have like literally separated by a wall, and in some cases it's like literally just a doorway. You have this stable for like cows and stuff, like cows and horses. And then like on the other side of the wall, you've got the kitchen. So you're thinking, okay, well, that's not good, but it is, because now you're being exposed to these microbes and these germs from these animals, and that's actually a really good thing. Another thing to think about is pigs, right? Pigs are kind of looked down upon because they eat their own poop, and it's disgusting. Oh my God, don't eat pork. Okay, I'm not going to say eat pork, but here's the thing: pigs or piglets eat their mom's poop. Okay, that's part of their rearing process. Why do they do that? Because the mom's poop contains specific bacteria that the piglets need to populate their gut flora. Okay, it's really amazing how nature works. It's really fascinating. So the importance of good kind of gut bacteria is very important for immune health, because if you don't have the right mix-up of good gut bacteria, then you have increased likelihood of immune issues like allergies, eczema, asthma, all that stuff. But then you also have things like candida issues, yeast issues, fungus overgrowth, all sorts of stuff that can go really kind of out of control inside of you if from a very early age you don't have that stuff in place. Okay, so the take-home message here is get outside and get dirty, especially if you're a kid. If you're a kid or if you have kids. If you're a little bit older, then you want to be looking at really getting in a good quality probiotic into your diet. And if you're unfamiliar with how to do that, I have a very, very thorough probiotics report, which you can grab at supernutritionacademy.com/probiotics. And it's an incredible report that will show you exactly what to look for in a probiotic, because there's really not a lot of information out there other than information telling you that probiotics are good, but no one shows you how to choose one. So anyways, that report is phenomenal. You'll really, really enjoy it. And yeah, so that's a great place to start. Otherwise, you can look at fermented foods like sauerkrauts, kombucha. Anything that's going to be fermented is a good source of good bacteria as well. So other things you can look at doing in terms of like going back to the food allergy stuff is getting tested. Go to your doctor, get an IgE test, find out if you have any full-blown allergies, and then can cross-reference that with doing an IgG test at a naturopathic doctor. I'll just give you forewarning, the IgG might cost you anywhere from about $200 to $300 depending on where you live. So if you want to make that expense, you can go for it. It might give you some peace of mind. But also remember that if nothing comes back on that test, like if like me, if you tested for 300 things and nothing came back, then there's probably other stuff going on, right? There's other components or there's other pathways that these foods might be affecting you. There could be lectins, different little anti-nutrients in foods that could be causing issues. So there's all sorts of stuff that we're discovering more and more of as we progress. And I talk about, when I say we, I really mean the scientific community with respect to health. So yeah, food allergies are becoming more common. They're affecting more people. Intolerances are a digestive issue. Food sensitivities are probably very, very common in a lot of people. And one of the best ways I would recommend initially to kind of track this stuff is to keep a food journal. So for let's say a week, write down what you have for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And then before each of those entries, write down how you felt, right? Did you feel tired? Were you starving? Were you craving certain foods? And then after you had the meal, jot down how you felt. Okay, so if you notice that you had pasta for lunch and then you felt like falling asleep afterwards, and you notice that trend, quite often, then that's telling you something. Okay, there's something in that food that's not working well for you. It doesn't necessarily mean that that's an allergy or a sensitivity. It could be a blood sugar thing, could be an insulin response, but nonetheless, you can identify certain foods that are problematic. So that's a great place to start, and that's something I'd recommend anyone do at least for 1 week to track things properly, to really see where things are at. So let's leave it at that for today. Hopefully this episode has given you some really cool insights and understanding of food allergies, intolerances, and food sensitivities. And again, if you've got any questions, be sure to come back to the site, supernutritionacademy.com. Actually, come to the blog, /blog. So supernutritionacademy.com /blog. Find the post related to this episode numero 5 and post a comment. Let me know your thoughts if you've got any issues with the IgE stuff. And I'd love to hear from you. And until then, have a great day. Take action on what we talked about. And we'll see you in the next episode of the Super Nutrition Academy Health Class.